hello. Welcome back to the Career Corner podcast where we answer your cozy career cues. I'm your season 5 host, Malcolm Alexander, and I am super excited because on today's show, we'll be joined by Paul Gagliano, Griffin Homan, and Professor Doug Turnbull of Localify. Thank you guys so much for being here today. Before we get into talking about actually sort of what Localify is and everything we're going to talk about, I'd love to hear just sort of briefly from all of you a little bit about yourself. So maybe what your current role is at Localify or what your role was at Localify. If you're a student still, what year you are, what your majors and minors are, and what sort of got you involved with the Localify project. So Doug, if you'd like to start, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm Doug Turnbull. I've been a professor at Ithaca College for 15 years. I teach in the computer science department, and my passion is like live music and local music communities. That's both like a personal passion and a research passion. And really, for the last 15 years, I've been working on different apps that help people learn about their local music communities and support local artists. Um, and I run an undergraduate research lab, and we work on these apps. And Griffin and Paul are both recent graduates of that lab and have moved on to bigger and brighter things.
My name is Griffin. I recently graduated in May with Paul. I worked on the project since 2022, going into that summer. And I worked for 4 summers and 3 winters, and all through the semester. And I worked mostly on app design and mostly web design. I actually built like the whole infrastructure of the web app that's now pretty much fully up and flourishing, and helped design that, build it, and have helped mentor other students onto it. And a little bit of back end stuff here and there, but mostly sort of the look and feel of the site.
Awesome. That's so cool. All right, Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm Paul. I just graduated as well. I was mostly a backend developer on Localify. I did some work on the recommender system as well as some academic research. I originally got into the project because I was a music major before I was a computer science major. So I spent a year in conservatory, um, and so obviously I really love music and live events and stuff like that.
Cool. Yeah, I can totally see that connection there. So, for any of our listeners who maybe are a little bit unfamiliar with what Localify is, what is Localify? What is the goal of it? What actually is it? What does it do? What is Localify for our viewers?
Yeah.
Uh,
You
oh,
go,
go
Griffin.
ahead,
No,
Paul.
no, no, you go, Griffin. I'd like to hear
I
from
was
you
just gonna
guys.
say, how I always put it is Localify is sort of an engine for, taking away attention from, the Taylor Swifts and the Drakes and sort of expanding people's music listening habits. It's a way of, finding events and getting away from your screen or discovering new artists. And I just see it as a way of sort of broadening people's, listening habits and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. Doug, do you have anything you'd
Yeah,
like
well, I
to?
was just say, like recently coming out of COVID, a lot of small local venues have been really hurting. A lot have closed down here and in other countries. And increasingly, I see our mission as being about introducing new people to in the community to our local music scenes all across the country and in Canada. And the goal is to get people to sort of appreciate local music as much as, say, local food or local theater or local art, local, produce, local wines. Music is both an economic driver. It's also a big driver of like community participation, understanding. There's just a lot of benefits to having a strong local music community, and that's being sort of eroded by a lot of contemporary trends, a lot of screen time, a lot of anxiety about public places. COVID obviously really caused a giant pause in live music, and I don't think we've recovered, and I fear we might never recover. So the goal is to build an app that gets people connected to the local music scene, and learn about local artists and local venues, and maybe that convinces them to see more shows, which then has a feedback effect on strengthening local music scenes.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes total sense. That kind of brings me to my next question, honestly, which is basically sort of I'd like to hear from all of you your own personal thoughts on why doing something like this is important. Why is it important to have apps that help foster these local communities, help foster these local music scenes, in our current age, especially where technology is changing very fast? I guess why should people really care about this, and why do you care so much about this?
I can speak like personally. I spent my whole childhood kind of playing violin in local bands, and doing like recording work and stuff with local artists. And you see so much talent that just goes not unseen, but doesn't get as seen as much of the like mass consumed stuff that comes out of the music industry. And I think it's really important for people to have a connection to the music that is in their own spaces. And it's a really unique experience to be able to go see an artist and then talk to the artist after the show. You can't talk to Ariana Grande. Uh, so I think it's important for people to use that kind of to build communities and to support the musicians around them.
I love that. Doug, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, when I give academic talks on this, I really connect it with like the economic impact and like it's not just the artist or it's the bartender, it's the security guard, it's the sound recording tech, it's the music education teacher, it's the local music store that's selling instruments, it's the restaurants and hotels that benefit from people coming to see shows. It's like this whole ecosystem of benefit to our society and our community. And actually, there, like I was mentioning earlier, there's actually been more spending on music, but it's been for like these giant stadium selling out artists. People are spending ridiculous sums of money on these giant stadium tours, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's like for a fraction of that cost, people can go out, they can meet people, they can dance, they can meet artists, as Paul was saying. And I have also young kids. I'm in my basement jam room, and my sixth grade son has a band, and it's like all about them finding a stage to play in. And I do fear that like you can imagine a future where there's no small venues, there's no sort of small and up and coming artists, there's no path for them to tour and to sort of be discovered. Everything is sort of produced in a factory. And I don't want to see a world like that. So this is part of the project to get people to explore music, but it's also sort of an exercise in sort of showing what we value in our community. And so the hope is like Localify may or may not be successful in terms of achieving lots of users and everything, but if other big record platforms like Spotify or Apple Music or whatever kind of start to appreciate supporting local artists and small venues, then I think we call that a win.
Absolutely. That makes total sense. Griffin, go for it.
Um, I really like Localify's mission just because I feel like there's a lot of artists that constantly are trying to be heard but kind of get drowned out. I think that there's a lot of talented musicians, in um the area around us. Like I have a lot of friends in bands, especially I'm from the Boston area, so my friends are constantly playing at different bars in the area, and I've been going to that and having a lot of fun, probably more fun than I would going all the way down to Fenway to go see, Taylor Swift or Ariana Grande. So I really appreciate that Localify is sort of taking on that mission of sort of supporting these more local and small time artists, and also sort of taking away from, recommendation systems like at Spotify or Apple Music, sort of raising the bar for these artists and making it even harder because, you'll be listening to someone like Drake, and then all of a sudden the next person to be recommended is The Weeknd and not someone that maybe has a similar style in your area. And so I think Localify tries to tackle a lot of different areas in sort of this, inequality, I guess is the best way to put it. And I just kind of like how we tackle that mission.
Absolutely. I love that you all sort of mentioned different aspects of the general mission. Like Paul, you sort of mentioned that this is about it's getting more personable with artists. You get closer connections with these artists. Griffin, you mentioned that if you are an artist, you're now getting closer to fan bases that you might not have previously had a lot of access to. And Doug, you're talking about that if you're a community where all of this is happening, all these performances and these artists are existing, you are benefiting from this too. So it's sort of this cool triple win situation.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. Localify definitely has a bunch of different aspects that we're tackling.
Love it. I'd love to hear a little bit about sort of the genesis of Localify, the beginning. Where did the idea come from? How did the project begin? I'd love to hear anything about that.
Yeah, I mean the backstory. So I've been working with students on this for a long time, and the previous project. That's my dog. I was hoping my daughter would come get her. But But the backstory is there was an old app called Meg's Radio, and it was sort of like Pandora, but for local music. So it's music streaming, and it was a great project, and a bunch of students at Ithaca College worked on it for a number of years. So we worked on this Meg's Radio project, which was pretty successful, and a bunch of students worked on it. And then it got really hard to like source and stream music. Just the cost, the upkeep was so hard that we couldn't really sustain it. And then I went on sabbatical, and there's a student named John Berger, and he sort of did Localify as like a prototype for a senior project. And then like we thought it was cool, and then we sort of iterated on it for a little bit. And I had an earlier team kind of build out a more complete prototype. And it was all based on our event recommendation. And then COVID hit, and it sort of canceled all the events. So then Paul and Griffin kind of came in with a couple other students and kind of built it up from scratch. April Trainer was like the first student to really work on it. Um, uh, you know, uh, half a dozen or more students have kind of worked on it at various aspects, front end, back end, outreach, all sorts of things. So it's sort of like this evolution of just building different apps. We also built apps like around Porch Fest. We build apps that are more like audio analysis apps. But Localify is sort of the mainstay, and I really like it because it has such an important sort of community dimension to it, as we've discussed. Um, and then the work continues. I have a new team that's sort of a lot of younger students right now, and the work continues. We're always sort of adding new features and sort of making it more robust and sort of building it up. So it's an ongoing project, and a lot of it's really just hard to get people to change their behaviors and adopt new apps. But these are the things that we struggle with. Also, like building an app with students is much more challenging than say having a tech startup where you have dedicated people working 40 hours a week all year round. We sort of do most of our work in the summer. And then make marginal progress during the academic year. So it's definitely an interesting project. But I think the other thing we haven't mentioned is that it's all about student opportunities for growth in the tech space. So we sort of operate like a tech startup. And I don't know, maybe Paul and Griffin can speak more to this, but like you sort of learn the skills that you would need in like a serious tech job, and you sort of can hit the ground running in industry because you've had a bigger sort of role and in a more impactful sort of experience doing this kind of work as a student.
Yeah, so already getting that opportunity to, build an entire web app is something that's it's not common going straight into the job market. And it was definitely something that was helpful for me when I was looking for a job and finally got one, especially with, the market being so bad. So building such like a big project where you have so much ownership, even like this early in your career and being a student, it was very helpful, especially being able to see, every piece of the system more or less and not having like that yellow tape. And so like in building it and learning from when I was a freshman and sophomore, learning from older students, it was definitely very helpful.
Yeah, Paul, I'd love to hear anything that you have to say about sort of your own experience being a student who gets to work on a project that is this sort of huge and interesting.
Sure. So Griffin covered most of it. The fact that it's structured like a startup is very helpful. A lot of companies use that sort of daily stand-up kind of format now, so it's good training. And actually, Griffin and I now work for the same company doing the same daily stand-ups that we used to do, and so that's kind of interesting. The other thing I will say is it's a lesson in humility almost, especially like new students coming into the project. It's very hard to wrap your head around like this massive code base, especially like as a freshman or sophomore, whenever you get introduced to it. And you spend a lot of time getting your code changed and removed and changed again and fixed and wiped and then rewritten, and it's a good lesson, and everything you write is just a learning experience. And we like well, I mean, we've graduated now, but we're all in school, and so like that was the most important thing.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, this is the Career Corner podcast, so obviously we do like to talk about careers at least somewhat. And one thing that comes up in almost every episode is this idea that getting to work on big projects that are sort of genuinely the field that you're going into, is incredibly helpful for once you actually get out into the job market. So that totally corroborates everything we usually hear. I would like to hear a little bit more about some of the challenges that Localify has faced. Doug, I know you mentioned that sort of breaking people out of their patterns, the apps that they really like to use is one, but I'd love to hear from all of you any sort of challenges that during your time you ran into and how you got over them.
I probably will take this first. One of the biggest issues, so I did front end development for localify.org, and one of the biggest issues we had was figuring out what sort of medium we wanted to use, or like what sort of device or app we wanted to, build this application for, because we had all like the back end and the database and the connections between Spotify and XYZ. What really was lacking is that we didn't really have a front end, which is where, you click buttons, you sort of scroll through. And it took us pretty much all the way through my going into sophomore year summer until the end of like going into my senior year summer to really get a web app is what we ended up deciding on. But we went through, an old web app, and then we moved on to a it's called React Native. It basically allows you to create one file that will work on both Android and iOS, which is good if it's a lot more simple to just manage one sort of, platform that will work for both devices. But we decided that it was a little clunky, and then we moved on to iOS only. And then we decided that everyone wouldn't have access. So then we moved on to web app, and that's kind of what we stuck with. And made it mobile friendly so that if you were to have a mobile device, anyone could use it just by logging on to, Safari or Google. But then eventually they're actually building the iOS app now, and I believe a little bit of the Android. But it's nice having, a fully functioning web app that can be used anywhere. And that was one of our biggest struggles. And I even say that like in job interviews when I was doing that, that was like the biggest like issue that we had.
Yeah, I can imagine
Yeah.
I mean, I am someone who's like pretty useless when it comes to numbers, and so anything involving web development or that kind of production is completely foreign to me, but I can only imagine that it can get incredibly complicated and detailed to get everything to work together.
Yeah.
Paul
Yeah,
or
Malcolm, I think one of the biggest my biggest issue is I have these really talented students that take some time to grow into the project. As Paul was saying, there's this pretty steep learning curve. But eventually they all come around and they do great work. And again, we sort of structure everything so that there's no hierarchy, like everybody's contributing and everyone has ownership over their part of the project. But then they go off and graduate, and like Paul and Griffin do, and then like the next generation has to come in. They're no matter how much prepping and mentoring they get from the older students, you always take like a step back. And so building like a professional grade app in an academic setting is just really challenging. And all of what Griffin just said about all of the like decisions that were made to arrive at the current point, like new students have never had that. They didn't know that all. And so like they don't know why decisions were made. And when students graduate, obviously they take a lot of that experience with them. And so we make slow progress because it's just the way academic projects are structured. Usually academic projects are sort of built as prototypes and sort of left on the shelf, and they collect dust and eventually disappear. But this project has had a lot of staying power, but it does require constant sort of upkeep and new students and growth. And it's great for education. It's less good for sort of making a stable and like, professional grade app.
I think the other
absolutely.
sorry, I think the other issue with student turnover, especially is in the technology itself. Like a lot of the time, like a new generation of students will come in and want to kind of change the way we've been doing things because, as Doug was saying, like they don't know why we decided this. They can't understand the decision making, and sometimes the technology does change, and it's a valid concern to think about like using a different tool. And I think there's a lot of the reason that Griffin and I were so successful, I think, is because we didn't change a lot. Like we kept a lot of the architecture from previous students, and it allowed us to go further and get an
I
app out
agree.
actually.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, my last question here for everyone is what is next for Localify, and where can our listeners find Localify if they would like to tap in and get using?
Yeah, well, again, with as Paul was just saying, with new students, they always have new ideas. We were actually just had our weekly meeting today, and we have a winter sprint like 2 weeks in January where the new students sort of learn to like have 40-hour weeks for 2 weeks in a row, which is cool. And a big new area is so far Localify has been mainly what we call read only, like people can learn about shows and stuff, but they can't contribute a lot of data. They can't tell us about like genres or similar artists. They can't tell us about upcoming new events. So we're creating a lot of crowdsourcing opportunities so that it becomes a little bit more like a wiki where people can share information and you sort of you know develop a sort of more information about local artists. So and we have a whole sort of editor system, kind of like Wikipedia, whereas people like contribute more, they have more authority and they can contribute even more. So making it a little more social, a lot of crowdsourcing, and and then that'll hopefully allow us to get what we call more granular events where we get more local, smaller shows at smaller venues. It's really hard. Right now we primarily use web scrapers to collect all that data from different APIs, and they just don't do a great job of getting the small shows, the intimate shows with like 10 to 100 people. They're very good at shows with 500 or more people, but we really want to sort of focus on smaller venues and more intimate shows. And I think that'll add a lot of value to like people who are interested in those sort of smaller, more intimate experiences.
I'm not really working on the project so much like the code base really anymore, but the ideas that Doug just mentioned actually are like ideas that we've been talking about since like
Yeah,
I
forever.
joined. Like we were talking about like, like people contributing and then like if someone input, fake events or whatnot, like sort of saw like soft banning them. These were all like things that we were talking about like 2 years ago, but decided that, we had to focus on the main features of the app and then we could get to the good stuff. So it sounds like they're starting to get to the good stuff right now. But something I've also noticed is on social media, this past summer when I was, my last summer there, we started working on social media and whatnot and outreach. And what I've seen so far on Instagram, like it's kind of kept me in the loop. So I think definitely keeping the social media posts on LinkedIn, Instagram, whatnot. I think it really goes with the vibe, and clearly they've been making a push on it, which was something that we kind of struggled with in the past.
I think one other thing, and maybe Paul can speak more to this, is like there's actually we haven't really talked about it, but there's a big research angle, like where we do really we're sponsored by the National Science Foundation. We've had a series of grants, which are collaborative grants with my colleague Thorsten Yoakams at Cornell, and his students, and that we quite frequently interact with them. We go over to their research meetings and present there, and go to conferences and stuff with them. And so Paul and Griffin wrote a paper this summer that was presented at a big recommender systems conference. So we do a lot, like we also are sort of innovating in the sort of recommender system algorithms kind of space too, and sharing and also human AI interaction space as well. Like how do we contextualize the recommendations that we make so that users better understand these things. So there's also like that's always an ongoing part of this. There's partly the app which is sort of user facing, but there's also the research which goes back to the academic community.
That's awesome. So it sounds like some really exciting work is being done, both to get the app sort of more into a cool new state, but also
Yeah,
a lot of work just on the general sort of educational research side of things.
for sure.
So that's awesome. That's really cool. Well, thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate taking some time out of your day to come speak with me. I think this is really, really fascinating stuff, and I think our listeners are going to absolutely love it.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Yeah, it
Thank
was
you.
nice to reminisce.
Yeah.
And thank you all for listening to another episode of the Career Corner podcast. We will see you again soon. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow Career Corner on Instagram and Spotify to stay up to date with future releases. If you're interested in posing some more cozy career cues or in checking out the Career Closet, Headshot Booth, and all the other cool resources available, feel free to stop by drop-in hours at the Center for Career Exploration and Development in Miller Faculty Center 101 from 11 to 2, Monday through Friday. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Career Corner podcast.